Welcome to the course on religion and human rights in Southeast Asia. My name is Dr. Mark Capaldi, and I'm from the Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies at Mahidol University in Thailand. I'm together here with my colleague.
And my name is Chalalaitai Sriprapha and my name is Phi, so please feel free to call me Phi. I'm a PhD candidate at the Institute and I'm doing a research on child marriage in Thailand.
So this class is going to be looking at the phenomenon of child marriage in Southeast Asia and the extent that different religions may fuel this practice. Firstly, let's be clear on the definition of child marriage. So child marriage is seen as relating to formal or informal marriages that involve at least one child below the age of 18 years, with or without their consent. Although applying to both boys and girls, it is generally girls that are affected by this practice. There has actually been considerable debate about the correct definition of child marriage, which is often referred to as early marriage, with the two terms used interchangeably. Especially as in many countries around the world, children aged between 16 and 17 years of age can still get married with the consent of their parents. In fact, the issue of child marriage is multifaceted and very complex. For example, the term forced marriage is often used when one or both of the children have not given their free or full consent. However, many human rights advocates would argue that child and early marriage is always a forced marriage because it is considered that children cannot give their consent to marry. So this has led to a more academic concept or terminology used of child, early and forced marriage, CEFM. And this is utilized in many of the most recent literature and advocacy work to end this practice. So Phi, let me ask you, why is child marriage considered so bad and how much of a problem is it globally?
Well, Mark, whilst there are many different uses of terminology, what is not open to debate is the adverse effects on child marriage, resulting in harmful health, economic, and social consequences for children, especially girls. Categorized primarily by socio-economic inequalities, studies show a significant association between child marriage and all forms of gender-based violence. This has been shown to result in higher rates of depression and suicide, especially amongst girls married as children. Also, early sexual activity leads to early pregnancy, a greater risk to STDs and HIV, and physical immaturity for childbearing, placing the girl brides at heightened risk of maternal morbidity and mortality. Although global statistics report that child marriage has been decreasing in recent decades. In 2020, UNICEF reported 12 million girls annually still get married before the age of 18. Whilst the highest levels of child marriage are found in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, the practice remains prevalent in many countries in Southeast Asia. Let me give you some examples. Recent government's national statistics show the proportion of women in Vietnam married before the age of 18 at 11%, and as high as 33% in Laos. Furthermore, the international NGO Girls Not Brides estimates that almost 20% of girls in Cambodia are married before their 18th birthday, and around 2% are married before the age of 15. In Thailand, where I've been carrying out my study, there are similar estimates from Girls Not Brides, with 20% of girls reportedly married before their 18th birthday and around 3% married before the age of 15.
Thanks, Phi. Well, clearly a worrying human rights issue. So what does the international human rights framework say about child marriage? Surely this practice is banned at the international level.
Yeah, Mark. Child marriage is clearly a human rights violation, and there are a number of United Nations treaties relevant to child marriage, as can be seen in the slides. However, although child marriage is not specifically mentioned in all these treaties, there are a number of rights which contradict to the phenomenon of child marriage. For example, the right to the enjoyment of the highest standard of health, as child marriage endangers the physical and mental well-being of both the girl child and her infant if she has one. And the second one is the right of the child to education, as child brides and grooms often drop out of school early. The third one is the right to freely enter marriage only within both spouses' free and full consent. And the last one, which I can tell you, is the right to protection from all forms of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse, and the right to protection from harmful traditional practices.
So what is the link being made to religion? Marriage is clearly an important event in people's lives and is often seen as a sacred reflection of someone's moral and religious beliefs. Religion also teaches us about compassion and love. It's not meant to be about causing harm or abuse. So why is religion often accused of causing child marriage, and is it a fair criticism?
Well, firstly, an analysis by the International Center for Research on Women found that countries with high rates of child marriage occur across all faiths and not one particular religion to begin with. The Southeast Asian region is religiously diverse, although the three main religions found are Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. However, whilst child marriage might not be tied to one faith, available evidence suggests that it is more prevalent in Muslim communities, which is one of the main religions found in Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, there is a lot of religious doctrine in all religions that can be used to justify child marriage. But other interrelated causal factors also clearly exist, such as poverty, local culture, patriarchal power, and low levels of education of girls. In fact, family poverty has been found to be one of the most dominant causes influencing parents to marry off their daughters as a way to secure the family's financial status and to protect the purity of the daughter and honor of the family. Therefore, recognizing the many potential drivers of child marriage, it should be understood that child marriage is not exclusively tied to one faith.
It is interesting that you mentioned the importance of the purity of the daughter and the dignity of the family as a factor linked to child marriage. Certainly, most religions take a strong moral view on sex outside of marriage, for example. Religions basically view sex as needed for procreation, not for pleasure. So religions play a significant role in the policing and control of sex and sexuality, more often than not linking that to silence and shame. Within such contexts, it is possible that religion can be seen as a basic norm that justifies child marriage, as sex outside of marriage can be viewed as a sin.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I believe that there are four main ways in which religious doctrine and beliefs can be used to justify child marriage. To begin with, firstly, religious patriarchal ideology and customs. The relationship between child marriage and religion is marked by the power of religion to influence behavioral outcomes, both at an individual and community level. Within most religions, religious affiliation generally expects females to be submissive, pure, and docile. This is linked to my next point, the second one. Sex outside wedlock as a religious taboo and a sin. Across Southeast Asia, there is an undeniable taboo, stigma, and shame surrounding the topic of sexuality. Child marriage can thus be viewed within a community as a necessary event recommended to preserve the moral and social status of the girl and her family. And the third one is conservative interpretations of religion. Religious conservatives want to resist what they see as social changes that undermine traditional religious doctrine and go back to a more traditional and literal belief systems. For example, many Muslims follow a conservative interpretation of the Quran and agree that Islam permits child marriage. This is based largely upon the Holy Script that the Prophet married one of his wives who was 9 years old at the time of her marriage. Even within Christianity, it is sometimes suggested that Mary was around 12 to 14 years of age when she marries Joseph. And the last one, concept of maturity for marriage. Traditional, social, and indeed religious norms have long been portrayed sexual maturity in girls as the onset of menstruation. Some religious leaders and community members do not see that adulthood is consistent with legal age of childhood, believing that some girls are already sufficiently mature from the age of 12 years, for example.
Of course, in some communities, religion creates a belief in fate, that something is given by God. And in such cases, based on the points you've just mentioned, those in the community, or even the girls themselves, may believe that early marriage is inevitable. Furthermore, dogmatic religious beliefs, in other words, those rigid rules or conservative interpretations set down by religious authorities, can propagate fears of stigma and shame around adolescent sexuality. Patriarchy and conservative beliefs have significant power to influence communities, which can entrench child marriage practices. All religions have dogmatic beliefs, but it's the religious doctrine which dictates how religion is interpreted. So in that case, Phi, is it possible that faith and religious leaders can actually promote child rights as a way to eradicate child marriage?
Yes, Mark. Several strategies have been promoted by religious organizations such as FEOs to eliminate this harmful practice. FEOs can play an important role in helping remodel people's perception towards child marriage. However, it is not always easy for FEOs to work against this issue in a straightforward manner since their attempts may be viewed as threats. In communities where child marriage is endorsed and where there is resistance to stop the practice, there are perhaps three key approaches that FBOs in Southeast Asia are using as alternative methods in aiming to end child marriage. The first one is encouraging the balance between female and male religious leaders in the hope of decentralizing religious male domination. The second one is engaging and educating religious leaders about children's rights. And the last one is highlighting good practice using case study examples.
Certainly the use of media and the generation of publicity around cases of child marriage can drive a groundswell of public support against cases of child marriage. For example, as you've mentioned, Sharia law, which is practiced in the southern provinces of Thailand, allows for marriages to take place regardless of age. And back in 2018, there was a very famous case in the news of an 11-year-old Thai girl married off to a 41-year-old Malaysian man. And this created a huge public outcry that pushed the faith-based organizations in the community, such as We Peace and the Islamic Council, to set the minimum age for marriage to 17 years of age. So the role of FBO's faith-based organizations in tackling child marriage within Southeast Asia can therefore be highly influential. What about NGOs and civil society organizations? Do they have a role to play as partners in this?
Yes, definitely. But the predominant focus on interventions by international organizations and civil society organizations has primarily been around strengthening the education opportunities for girls. These perhaps suggest that more ingrained factors, such as religion and culture that we are talking about, are considered too complex and sensitive to meaningfully tackle.
Thank you, Fai, for this discussion. So what have we learned in this class? Although the global statistics report that child marriage has been decreasing in recent decades, secondary data suggests it has also remained stable or even increased in other areas. In Southeast Asia, child marriage continues to rise in some countries. So the question remains as why is this the case? Is the international human rights framework not strong enough to effectively tackle the problem of child marriage? Religious beliefs and norms are clearly critical factors that perpetrate child marriage in Southeast Asia. Some religious precepts that relate to sexual activities, such as the prohibition of premarital sex and abortion, are seen as the religious justifications that validate child marriage. However, there are many factors which contribute towards child marriage, and whilst religious beliefs may not be looked at as the primary causal factor in Southeast Asia, they are an explanation of why child marriage is still accepted or even encouraged. The good news is that there is potential for duty bearers, religious leaders, and all other stakeholders to better tackle the interplay of all of the factors covered in our class today. Clearly, there is a need for legal reform, national level advocacy, and local campaigning to educate and influence key stakeholders, especially religious leaders, to end child marriage. Fai, to finish our class, what would be the other key recommendations that you'd suggest for policymakers?
I would prioritize 3 more points. The first one is tackling patriarchy and changing misperceptions to promote gender equality. These needs to include engaging and educating men and young boys to prevent gender-based violence. The second one is expecting child marriage to stop adolescent sex is not the solution. Governments must allow and provide comprehensive sex education for youth. Acknowledging religious conservatism, these should be age-appropriate, culturally relevant, and non-judgmental. And the third one is raising awareness on child rights and engaging religious leaders, especially female and younger leaders, and FEOs as allies, can bring significant influence as they are generally respected by community members of that particular faith.
Okay, thank you, Fai. So it's clear that although the international human rights mechanisms and in many countries their national legislation agrees on the harm of child marriage and bans it, clearly governments and religious leaders cannot ignore that more needs to be done to address the cultural and religious practices or beliefs that perpetuate child marriage. Thank you, and we hope that you have found this class interesting.